All right, you beautiful bastards, buckle up. Because today we're diving headfirst into the Syrian shitstorm. Remember that ceasefire they were bragging about? Yeah, that went to hell in a handbasket faster than a Kardashian marriage.
It's been a roller coaster, that's for sure. After a brief lull, the Syrian civil war kicked off again in 2024, and everything went sideways.
Let's cut the crap. Assad got his ass handed to him right. The Syrian opposition finally said, enough of this dictator bullshit, and booted him out.
Essentially, yes.
Yeah.
The opposition launched a series of massive offensives throughout 2024, and by December 8th, Assad was out of power and on the run.
And that's when Israel said, hold my beer. Watch this. They've been eyeing the Golan Heights for decades. And with Syrian chaos, they saw their chance.
It was a strategic move, no doubt. With Syrian forces abandoning their positions along the border, Israel wasted no time moving in to occupy the UNDOF buffer zone.
UNDOF. The hell is that? Sounds like some kind of discount toothpaste.
UNDOF stands for United Nations Disengagement Observer Force. They've been in the Golan Heights since 1974, keeping the peace between Israel and Syria after the Yom Kippur War. It's a demilitarized zone, a buffer to prevent any funny business.
So basically, Israel said, screw the UN, we're moving in. Does they say it was just temporary, though, to prevent hostile forces from taking over?
That's the official line, but let's be real, they're already acting like they own the place. They've imposed curfews, they're holding meetings with local leaders about surrendering weapons. It's looking pretty permanent to me.
Temporary, my ass. This is Israel we're talking about. They're like that friend who borrows your favorite shirt and never gives it back.
The speed and scale of their operation are certainly noteworthy. They didn't just send in ground troops. They launched a full-blown air and naval offensive hitting Syrian military targets all over the country. They called it Operation Arrow of Bashan, and it was a complete beatdown.
Wait, Arrow of Bashan? Is that a biblical reference or something?
Bashan was a region in ancient Syria known for its fertile land and strong bulls. It's mentioned in the Bible and Jewish texts.
So they named their military operation after a bunch of ancient bulls. Talk about badass branding.
It certainly has a certain ring to it, but the reality on the ground was anything but poetic. Hundreds of airstrikes in a matter of days, targeting air bases, weapon depots, even the entire Syrian Navy.
Holy shit, they sunk the entire Syrian Navy. That's some next-level aggression right there.
Yeah.
I bet Assad's sitting in his bunker somewhere wishing he hadn't pissed off the Israelis so badly.
It was a decisive display of military power, no doubt. And Israel's justification is that they're preventing the proliferation of weapons and safeguarding their border. But of course, not everyone is buying it.
No shit. The UN is probably having collective aneurysm, right? And the Arab League. I bet they're spitting fire.
There's been widespread condemnation from the UN, the Arab League, and countries like Egypt, France, Iran, Turkey. They're all pretty pissed off about Israel's action.
But the U.S., as usual, is standing by their BFF Israel. They're probably giving him a high five and saying, good job taking out those terrorists. What a load of bullshit.
The U.S. response has been predictable, given their long-standing alliance with Israel. They're framing it as a necessary measure to counter terrorism and maintain stability in the region. But it raises some serious questions about international law and the potential for escalation.
Let's be honest, the real prize here is the Golan Heights. Israel's been squatting on that land since 1967, and they even tried to officially annex it back in 81.
Look.
But nobody recognized that land grab except for, surprise, surprise, the U.S. And now they're talking about doubling the Israeli population in the Golan Heights. Give me a break. They're never giving that land back.
The Golan Heights has immense strategic value for Israel. It provides them with a critical vantage point over Syria, access to vital water resources, and a buffer against potential threats. This latest move could solidify their hold on the region, but it's also creating a whole new set of problems.
Like, is Syria even in a position to fight back at this point? They're basically a punching bag for everyone right now.
The new Syrian government is facing a monumental task rebuilding their country, establishing control over their territory, and dealing with the fallout from this whole Israel situation. It's a powder keg, and nobody knows what's going to happen next.
Well, this has been a fascinating clusterfuck so far. What else have you got for me? Spill a tea? Let's get into the nitty-gritty.
Let's talk about the spillover effect. This whole mess in Syria is tangled up with the ongoing Israel-Hamas war, which is still raging on multiple fronts. It's like a dumpster fire with multiple points of origin.
Oh yeah, shit's hitting the fan all over the place. Israel's bombing, Gaza Hezbollah's lobbing rockets from Get around stirring the pot like a Michael Bay movie directed by Satan himself.
The Israel-Hamas war has definitely destabilized the entire region, emboldening actors like Hezbollah and Iran to challenge Israel's dominance. And with Syria in chaos, it creates an opportunity for them to exploit the situation and advance their own agendas.
So basically, everyone's using Syria as their personal playground to settle scores and flex their military muscles. It's like a giant game of Risk, but with real lives at stake. What a fucking mess.
It's a complex web of alliances and rivalries. That's for sure. Israel wants to secure its borders and eliminate perceived threats. Iran seeks to expand its influence and support its allies. Hezbollah aims to weaken Israel and prove its strength. And caught in the middle are the Syrian people who have already endured years of brutal conflict.
It's like a goddamn episode of Jerry Springer, but with tanks and missiles. So what's the international community doing about all this? Are they just sitting back and watching the world burn?
There's been a lot of condemnation, of course. The UN Security Council is paralyzed. The Arab League is issuing strongly worded statements, and various countries are calling for restraint. But nobody seems willing to step up and actually do something to stop the violence.
Typical. Everyone's all talk and no action. It's like they're waiting for things to get even more fucked up before they even consider lifting a finger.
The lack of a coordinated international response is concerning, to say the least. It leaves a vacuum for regional powers to fill, potentially leading to a wider escalation of the conflict.
So we've got a power vacuum in Syria, a raging war between Israel and Hamas, and a bunch of international players watching from the sidelines, like it's a reality TV show. What could possibly go wrong?
It's a recipe for disaster, frankly. The potential for miscalculation for unintended consequences is incredibly high. And the longer this goes on, the more difficult it will be to contain the violence and find a lasting solution.
Let's talk about Israel for a second. They're acting like this whole temporary occupation is just them being good neighbors cleaning up the mess in Syria. But come on, we all know they're not giving up that land. They're playing the long game, slowly but surely expanding their territory and tightening their grip on the region.
Israel's actions are definitely raising questions about their long-term intentions. They've already announced plans to double the Israeli population in the Golan Heights, and there are reports that they're pushing even deeper into Syrian territory, establishing a zone of control that extends far beyond the original buffer zone.
It's all about control, isn't it? Land resources, strategic positioning. It's like a giant game of Risk, and Israel's determined to conquer the whole damn board.
Strategic considerations are definitely at play. The Golan Heights gives Israel a crucial vantage point over Syria, as well as access to vital water resources. By solidifying their hold on the region, they're enhancing their security and projecting their power in a very volatile neighborhood.
But it's coming at a price, isn't it? All this military action, all this talk of security and stability is creating more instability, more resentment, more fuel for the fire that's already burning out of control. And it's the ordinary people who are paying the highest price.
You're absolutely right. The human cost of this conflict is immense. We're talking about civilian casualties, displacement, economic hardship, the destruction of homes and infrastructure. The scars of this war will be felt for generations to come.
It's easy to get lost in the geopolitical chess game, but we can't forget about the human tragedy unfolding on the ground. Behind all the headlines and strategic analysis are real people whose lives have been shattered by this conflict.
And their voices often go unheard. The international media tends to focus on the military and political aspects of the war, while the everyday experiences of ordinary Syrians are often overlooked. It's crucial to remember that this conflict is not just about abstract concepts like territory or power. It's about people's lives, their hopes, their dreams. And those are being crushed under the weight of violence and instability.
All right, so we've painted a pretty bleak picture so far. Is there any hope for a peaceful resolution to this mess? Or are we all just fucked?
It's a tough question. There are no easy solutions, and the path to peace is riddled with obstacles. But history has shown that even the most intractable conflicts can eventually be resolved. It takes time, it takes compromise, and it takes a willingness to see the humanity in the other side.
Negotiation and compromise. In this shit show, I wouldn't bet on it. Everyone involved seems more interested in digging in their heels and escalating the violence. And let's be real, nobody's going to compromise on something as fundamental as land and security.
You're right. It's a difficult situation. It would require a fundamental shift in mindset, a willingness to prioritize dialogue over violence, and to recognize the humanity of the other side. And that's a tall order in a region riven by decades of conflict and mistrust.
So what's the answer then? More airstrikes. More drone troops, more strongly worded statements from the UN. None of that seems to be working.
The answer lies not in military solutions, but in political ones. It requires a concerted effort by all parties involved, as well as the international community, to address the root causes of the conflict. The political grievances, the economic inequalities, the historical injustices that have fueled this cycle of
Yeah,
violence.
but who's going to lead that charge? The UN, the US. They've both proven to be pretty useless in this situation.
It would require a coalition of the willing, a group of nations and organizations committed to working together to find a peaceful and just solution. And that includes not just the usual suspects like the US and the EU, but also regional players like Turkey, Iran, and Saudi Arabia, who have a vested interest in stability in the region.
Okay, so we need a global team effort, a willingness to address the root causes,
Yeah.
and a whole lot of luck. Sounds like a long shot to me.
It's challenging, no doubt, but the alternative is continued conflict and instability, and that's unacceptable. The stakes are too high, the human cost too great to simply give up hope.
All right, let's say for the sake of argument that this miracle happens and everyone decides to play nice. What would a peaceful resolution even look like?
It would require a comprehensive agreement that addresses the core issues at the heart of the conflict. This includes a political settlement in Syria that guarantees the rights of all citizens and paves the way for a more democratic and inclusive system, a resolution of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict based on a two-state solution that provides both Israelis and Palestinians with security and self-determination, and a regional security architecture that guarantees the sovereignty and territorial integrity of all states in the region.
Okay, so we're talking about a complete overhaul of the entire Middle East. That's ambitious, to say the least.
It is, but it's not impossible. It will require bold leadership, creative diplomacy, and a shared commitment to building a more peaceful and just future for the region.
All right, let's be real. What are the chances of that actually happening? Be honest.
The odds are long. There's no denying that. The region is deeply divided. Mistrust runs deep, and the scars of past conflicts continue to fester. But I refuse to believe that peace is unattainable. As long as there are people who believe in a better future, who are willing to work towards it, there's always hope.
Okay, that's a nice sentiment.
Yeah.
But it doesn't change the reality on the ground. We've got a ticking time bomb in Syria, and it feels like everyone's just waiting for it to explode.
The situation is undeniably precarious, but amidst the chaos and despair, there are also glimmers of hope. The Syrian people, despite years of unimaginable suffering, have shown incredible resilience and a determination to rebuild their lives. The international community, while often slow to act, has demonstrated a growing awareness of the need for a political solution. And new voices are emerging, calling for dialogue, reconciliation, and a peaceful future.
So you're saying there's a chance,
Right.
a tiny flickering ember of hope amidst the raging inferno.
Hope is a powerful force. It's what sustains us in the face of adversity, what drives us to seek a better tomorrow. And even in the darkest of times, it's important to remember that hope never truly dies.
All right, I'm going to choose to believe you on that one. But we're running out of time for this segment. Any final thoughts before we wrap this up?
The situation in Syria is a stark reminder of the fragility of peace and the devastating consequences of conflict. It's a call to action for the international community to work together to prevent further bloodshed and to find a lasting solution that addresses the root causes of the crisis.
Amen to that.
Oh,
All right, folks, that's it for part one of our deep dive into the Syrian shitstorm. We'll be back after a quick break with more insights, more analysis, and hopefully a little bit of hope for the future. Stay tuned.
you know, while we've been focused on the immediate crisis in Syria, there's a whole other layer to this Israel-Syria situation that's worth exploring.
Okay, hit me with it. What are we missing?
Think about the implications for the balance of power in the region. Israel has effectively neutered Syria's military capabilities. That shifts the dynamics considerably, especially when it comes to Iran.
Ah, right, Iran. They've been pouring resources into Syria for years, propping up Assad and building up their presence. What happens to their strategy now?
This is where it gets really interesting. Israel has long viewed Iran's entrenchment in Syria as an existential threat. They've repeatedly struck Iranian targets inside Syria, aiming to disrupt weapons shipments and limit their influence.
And now, with Assad out of the picture and the Syrian military in shambles, Israel's got a free pass to go all in on pushing back against Iran.
Precisely. They've removed a major obstacle and significantly weakened a key Iranian ally. This gives them more leverage to dictate terms in the region and potentially even reshape the strategic landscape.
So are we talking about a full-blown war between Israel and Iran? Because that sounds terrifyingly plausible right now.
A direct confrontation is still unlikely. Both sides understand the risks involved. However, we could see an escalation of proxy conflicts with both Israel and Iran supporting their respective allies in Syria and elsewhere.
The classic proxy war. Keeps your hands relatively clean while still achieving your objectives. Except, of course, for all the poor bastards actually fighting and dying on the ground.
It's a cynical but effective strategy, and one that's been employed repeatedly in the Middle East. The Syrian civil war itself was a proxy war with various regional and international powers backing different factions.
So basically, we're looking at a new chapter in the never-ending saga of Middle Eastern conflicts. Fantastic. Just what the world needs. More bloodshed and instability.
Unfortunately, that's a very real possibility. The situation is incredibly volatile, and any number of factors could trigger a wider escalation of the conflict.
So no happy ending in sight. Just more chaos, more suffering, more uncertainty.
Predicting the future is a fool's errand, but I think it's safe to say that the situation in Syria will continue to be a major source of instability and tension for the foreseeable future. The decisions made in the coming weeks and months will have profound implications for the region and the world.
Well, that's just fucking peachy. So what does this all mean for our listeners? Well, why should they care about what's happening on the other side of the world?
Because what happens in the Middle East doesn't stay in the Middle East. This conflict has global repercussions. It impacts energy prices, it fuels terrorism, it drives refugee crises, and it has the potential to draw in major powers like the US, Russia, and China.
Right, because we all know how much those guys love getting involved in Middle Eastern conflicts.
Yeah.
It's like their favorite pastime.
Their involvement, however, raises the stakes considerably. It increases the risk of miscalculation and escalation, potentially leading to a wider regional or even global conflict.
Okay, so we've got a messy, complicated, and potentially catastrophic situation on our hands. Any parting words of wisdom for our listeners as they try to make sense of this shit show?
Stay informed, be critical of the information you consume, and remember that there are always multiple perspectives on any given issue. The situation in Syria is complex, and there are no easy answers.
Solid advice.
Yeah.
And always remember, question everything, trust no one, and keep your bunker stocked with supplies. You never know when shit's gonna hit the fan.
I wouldn't necessarily advocate for bunker living, but staying informed and engaging in thoughtful discussion about these issues is certainly crucial.
All right, folks, that's it for part 2 of our deep dive into the Israel-Syria quagmire. We've covered a lot of ground, explored the complexities, and hopefully left you with more questions than answers. But hey, that's what keeps life interesting, right?
Indeed. The pursuit of knowledge and understanding is a lifelong journey. And the situation in Syria, while undeniably challenging, offers a valuable opportunity to learn to reflect and to engage in critical thinking about the world around us.
And on that note, we'll leave you to ponder the fate of the Middle East and the implications for the rest of us. Stay safe out there, folks, and until next time, keep your heads up and your minds sharp. Okay, folks, we're back and ready to dive even deeper into this Syrian shitstorm. We've talked about Israel's land grab, the international community's hand-wringing, and the general clusterfuck that is the Middle East right now. But I'm guessing there's more to this story, right?
You bet your ass there is. We've touched on the implications for Iran, but let's unpack that a bit more. This whole situation could be a game changer for their ambitions in the region.
Okay, break it down for us. Iran's been playing a long game in Syria, supporting Assad and spreading their influence. What happens to their plans now that their puppet's been kicked out and their Syrian playground is on fire?
Well, first, let's acknowledge that Iran's involvement in Syria isn't just about Assad. It's about establishing a strategic foothold in the region, projecting power, and countering their rivals, especially Israel and Saudi Arabia.
Right. It's all about that good old-fashioned geopolitical chess game. So with Syria in chaos, does Iran just pack up their bags and go home?
Not a chance. They've invested too much time, money, and blood in Syria to simply walk away. But they're definitely facing some serious challenges.
Like what? Give me the juicy details.
First, the loss of Assad as a reliable ally is a major blow. He provided them with access to Syrian territory, logistical support, and a platform to advance their interests. With him gone, they've lost a valuable asset.
So they're scrambling to find a new puppet to play with.
Not necessarily. They've been cultivating relationships with various militias and factions within Syria for years. They'll likely double down on these alliances and try to maintain their influence through these groups.
Sounds messy. But let's not forget about Israel. They've made it pretty clear that they're not going to tolerate Iran's presence in Syria. What happens when these two regional powerhouses bump heads?
That's the million-dollar question. It's a powder keg situation.
Yeah.
We could see an escalation of proxy conflicts, with both sides supporting their respective allies and engaging in tit-for-tat attacks.
So basically we're talking about a shadow war between Israel and Iran playing out on Syrian soil.
Precisely. And it's not just limited to Syria. We've already seen spillover into Lebanon with Hezbollah, Iran's main proxy, launching rockets into Israel. And there's always the risk that things could spiral out of control and lead to a wider regional conflict.
That's a cheerful thought. So what can be done to prevent this whole thing from going nuclear? Is there any hope of de-escalating the situation?
It's a tough one. Realistically, it would require a combination of diplomatic pressure, economic sanctions, and maybe even some back-channel negotiations to convince Iran to scale back its ambitions in Syria.
But who's going to do the convincing? The UN? The US? They seem pretty content to sit on the sidelines and watch the world burn.
You're not wrong. It would require a coordinated effort from the international community, something that's been sorely lacking in this entire Syrian mess. But it's not impossible. If there's enough political will, there's always a chance to find a way out of this quagmire.
Okay, so we've covered the geopolitical chess game. But what about the human cost of all this? We can't forget about the millions of Syrians whose lives have been upended by this conflict.
You're absolutely right. We're talking about a humanitarian crisis of epic proportions. Millions have been displaced, fleeing their homes to escape the violence and find safety in neighboring countries or Europe. The UN estimates that over 13 million people inside Syria need humanitarian assistance.
That's a staggering number. And what about the people who can't or won't leave? What are they facing?
They're living in a nightmare. Many are trapped in war zones, caught in the crossfire between government forces, rebel groups, and foreign powers. They're facing food shortages, lack of clean water, inadequate medical care, and constant fear for their lives and the lives of their families.
It's heartbreaking. And it feels like the world has moved on, forgotten about the suffering of the Syrian people.
There's a certain amount of compassion fatigue that sets in when a conflict drags on for so long. But we can't let ourselves become numb to the human cost of this war. These are real people with hopes and dreams just like us, who have been caught in the middle of a geopolitical shitstorm.
So what can we do? How can our listeners, who are probably feeling overwhelmed and powerless right now, actually make a difference?
There are a few things. First, stay informed. Don't let the Syrian crisis fade into the background noise of the news cycle. Second, support humanitarian organizations that are working on the ground to provide aid and relief to those affected by the conflict. And third, contact your elected officials and demand that they prioritize a peaceful resolution to the Syrian crisis.
Solid advice. Even small actions can make a difference when it comes to these kinds of complex global issues.
Absolutely. And never underestimate the power of raising your voice and demanding accountability from those in power.
All right, folks, we've reached the end of our deep dive into the Syrian quagmire. It's been a heavy journey filled with complexity, tragedy, and a healthy dose of cynicism. But hopefully you've come away with a better understanding of the forces at play and the human cost of this ongoing conflict. So until next time, stay informed, stay engaged, and as always, fuck the system.
I think I'll stick to advocating for informed and constructive engagement.
You do you. All right, folks, that's all for today. Stay safe out there and keep those brains buzzing. Peace out.